Okay, welcome. So today I wanted to offer some reflections about grief and the grieving process, and just some thoughts about how that links into complex PTSD and just how important it is. Okay. Yeah, so today I wanted to offer some reflections about grief. I received a message yesterday from a friend who mentioned he had been to boarding school, went to age 7, age 8, and he mentioned that he was in a space of grieving, crying a lot. It had been going on for a number of months, and he asked me, first of all, is this normal? And secondly, he asked me about my own experiences. So I thought I'd share a little bit from the books of Judith Herman, the psychiatrist, and also Pete Walker in complex PTSD. So what I replied was that in my own healing process, I went to boarding school, there was a lot of trauma, sexual abuse, and I dissociated, and I hadn't cried for decades. Even a friend of mine committed suicide, another friend died, my father died, and I didn't cry. I'd learned to dissociate. But I got to a point, having a breakdown, that I started to cry, and nearly every day for about 2 years I cried. Now, listening to Rod Boothroyd in the podcast I did with him, he talks about this level of water and how I've often seen it as a simile is this idea of a reservoir. So when we suppress emotion, we build up this dam, and instead of emotion flowing, it starts to build up. And that's often why, as trauma survivors, we really struggle to go, I can't go there, because we're worried that, wow, if you take those walls off, the whole of your inner kingdom, as I call it, will be washed away. So often the healing work is that we release the sluice gate at the bottom of the reservoir, and we cry. We cry, and eventually what happens is, as Rod Boothroyd says, the level of the water drops so we can breathe again. And what I find, continuing this simile with the reservoir, is eventually you can take the reservoir walls down and you just have a beautiful river again. So what often has happened is, because we've dammed up this reservoir, nothing is flowing. There's no joy. We have gone flatline. And certainly a lot of my work's around boarding school trauma. And we learned to not be too up and not be too down. We became flatline, like zombies. And what that means is we take that zombie-like feeling into our life, and literally the valley is dead. There's no life. As we start to open up, it can feel painful, because this is new. This is grief. This is tears. This is pain. We're opening it. It hurts. It hurts because we're not used to it. And as we open, actually we see the flip side is joy. And if we can hold that space, we can cry, we can grieve. What happens is the sluice gate opens and water starts to flow down the valley. We might become more creative. We might fall in love. We might suddenly get a new idea for a business. This is often what happens when we allow the grief through. So in answer to the question, how long? It might be a couple of years. It might be a few months. One of the things I found now is that tapping, whenever I'm feeling some tears, I'll tap. Often drop into my emotions, my feelings, and often the tears will flow. And whatever I'm carrying is released. Because I think, every week I'll cry, because life is sometimes challenging. But this is a normal part of being human. It's not just to be on a plateau of joy. It's a oscillating ride. But instead of us getting stuck in depression and locked there, or stuck in Pollyanna, we move and we flow. So I'm going to read a little bit First of all, I'm going to read Pete Walker's book, Complex PTSD. And he says, grieving as emotional intelligence, page 36. It says, grieving is the key process for reconnecting with our repressed emotional intelligence. Grieving reconnects us with our full complement of feelings. Grieving is necessary to help us release and work through our pain about the terrible losses of our childhood. These losses are like deaths of parts of ourselves, and grieving can often initiate rebirth, or like I've said about the river. So the first thing really, and he talks about this in this book, is the cognitive side. Often people step, I've got my trauma healing model here. You've got 3 steps: denial, awakening, integration. Often we step from denial into awakening through doing the cognitive side. We read about things. We read trauma and recovery. We read Nick Duffell's book, The Making of Them, or Alex Renton's Stiff Upper Lip, or Nick Duffell's, or Joy Schaverien Boarding School Syndrome, or another book about trauma. Because what this does is it's like this thing of the terrible losses of our childhood. If you've been to boarding school, it's a terrible loss. If you actually connect in, you realise you lost everything. Your parents, your safe home, your food, everything went very, very quickly. So we need to grieve and feel that. So that's the, that's key. He also goes on, Pete Walker says, grieving restores our crucial developmentally arrested capacity to verbally ventilate. Verbal ventilation is the penultimate grieving practice. It is speaking from your feelings in a way that releases and resolves your emotional distress. It's like, I'm really pissed off. It's like, that hurt. So we connect in with our feelings. Connect in with our belly or our chest, our solar plexus. What am I feeling? There's other bits he talks about here. He says the inner critic is sometimes so hostile to grieving that shrinking the critic may need to be your first recovery priority. So I've talked about this in other videos about the inner critic. We do need to just go, whoa, enough. I often found when I started to cry, because this is what I did at boarding school, was, you piece of shit, get it together. So I had to be very firm. And how I imagined it at the beginning of the grieving was I was being held by a benevolent father. So I could just imagine this benevolent father was around me, just going, you're okay, you're safe now. And I could just cry, and just cry, and then just cry, and it was okay. So I think what he's saying here is so true. Until the critic is sufficiently tame, grieving can actually make flashbacks worse rather than perform the restorative processes it alone can initiate. So it might be you've got to go back, and I'll put into the description about the the inner critic. I do recommend reading this book. He talks a lot about the inner critic. I've done a few videos about it. Is when you do that, then I'm allowed to grieve now. The in Judith Herman's book, Trauma and Recovery, she talks about 3 different stages for healing. She says it's a spiral. It's not that you go through 1 to 2 to 3. The same with this model here that I have is it's not that you go through 1 and then 2 to 3. No, you go to 3 and then you go back to 1. It's like, but it's a spiral. You're gradually going forward. And with Judith Herman's, the stages of recovery: first is safety, second is remembrance and mourning, and then the third is, is reconnection. So it links in a little bit with the work of Robert Moore. And also Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell said the 3rd stage is about returning with the boon. You kind of come back. What you've learned, you've gone down into the depths. You've gone in. You found the gold of your grief. And then you come back with your gift. So she says about mourning traumatic loss. Judith Herman. Telling the trauma story thus inevitably plunges the survivor into profound grief. Since so many of the losses are invisible or unrecognized, the customary rituals of mourning provide little consolation. The descent into mourning is at once the most necessary and the most dreaded task of this stage of recovery. Patients often fear that the task is insurmountable. Remember what I said about this reservoir? It's like, whoa, I just can't go there. That once they allow themselves to start grieving, they will never stop. And she gives a quote from Daniele. Daniele quotes a 74-year-old widow who survived the Nazi Holocaust. Even if it takes 1 year to mourn each loss, and even if I live to be 107 and mourn all members of my family, what do I do about the rest of the 6 million? So the survivor frequently resists mourning, not only out of fear but also out of pride. She may consciously refuse to grieve as a way of denying victory to the perpetrator. So for us, for complex trauma, I think it's quite confusing, especially for boarding school, because we're told it's a privilege. So how can I grieve something that's meant to be good for me? But then if you listen to Charles Spencer's interview, once you actually reflect on what happened, it's like, oh my God. And I hear, and I've got so many books up here on the top shelf there of from boarding school survivors, John Peel, Richard Branson, who've been through horrific, similar to what Charles Spencer went through, even some stories which are a lot worse, So I think this is important. So I'll just finish here. Since mourning is so difficult, resistance to mourning is probably the most common cause of stagnation in the second stage of recovery. Resistance to mourning can take on numerous disguises. Most frequently it appears as a fancy of magical resolution through revenge, forgiveness, or compensation. Through the process of mourning, the survivor must come to terms with the impossibility of getting even. As she vents her rage and safety, her helpless fury gradually changes into a more powerful and satisfying form of anger, righteous indignation. The transformation allows the survivor to free herself from the prison of the revenge fantasy in which she is alone with the perpetrator. So I think this is it. We need to connect in with the tears, feel them, acknowledge what we're doing, and if you're drawn to tapping, this is matrix re-imprinting, but also the trauma tapping technique. I interviewed the founder of the trauma tapping technique on my podcast. He goes to places like Rwanda and Eastern Europe, some of the Bosnia, working with tapping for his trauma, and that helps to release the mourning, the grieving process. So yeah, just some ideas, and yeah, I hope you're well. I'm on holiday next week. I will look to doing a video as well. So I hope this is useful. Please do comment below any questions, any thoughts, and thank you. And see, this is grieving it's an ongoing thing. It's like, give yourself, just sit, feel what you're feeling. Maybe at the end of the day, beginning of the day, and feel into your emotions. And if there's grief there, welcome it. And that just waters the valley below. Okay, blessings, take care.